My name is Damon Wilson, 68 years old, and I never expected to be sitting in this cold law office watching my daughter Jessica smirk at me. The words stung like ice water. $5. That was what my ex-wife Catherine thought I deserved after 30 years apart. My daughter leaned over, her designer jacket rustling. "You get $5, Dad." Little did she know what the next page of the will contained. If you ask me, karma works in mysterious ways. Before I tell you this incredible story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button too, so you never miss another wild true story like mine. Trust me, you will want to see how this ends. I met Catherine at a university fundraiser in 1979. I was 22, working as a waiter to pay for my business degree. Catherine was 21, brilliant and ambitious, already making waves in the economics department. She had this way of commanding attention without saying a word. When she walked into a room, people noticed. When our eyes met across that crowded ballroom, I spilled champagne on a donor. Somehow, that made her laugh, and the sound was like music. Our courtship was fast and intense. Within 6 months, I proposed. She said yes without hesitation, her blue eyes sparkling with tears. We were young, in love, and certain we would conquer the world together. The wedding was simple. We could not afford much, but we were rich in dreams and determination. The first 10 years were beautiful. We moved to Seattle, rented a small apartment downtown, and worked hard. I started a small restaurant, putting in 16-hour days. Catherine joined a fledgling tech company, quickly rising through the ranks with her sharp mind and strategic thinking. We supported each other, celebrated small victories, and weathered setbacks together. When Jessica was born in 1984, our happiness felt complete. She was perfect with her mother's blue eyes and my stubborn chin. Those early years with Jessica were magical. Catherine would sing to her while I cooked dinner. We would take turns rocking her to sleep. On weekends, we would pack a picnic and drive to the coast, letting little Jessica play in the sand while we talked about our dreams for her future. Catherine wanted her to be strong and independent. I wanted her to be kind and happy. We thought she could be all those things. The trouble began when Catherine founded her own company in 1989. Tech Fusion started as a small software firm with 10 employees, but Catherine had vision. She saw the digital revolution coming before most people had even touched a computer. The company grew exponentially, and so did the demands on her time. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. First, it was missed dinners, then forgotten school events. Catherine started traveling more, sometimes gone for weeks. I understood ambition. I respected her drive. But I worried about how it affected Jessica, who was only 5, and could not understand why Mommy was always busy. By the time Jessica turned 7, Catherine had transformed. The warm, laughing woman I married was replaced by someone constantly checking phones and making deals. Our conversations became transactions, brief exchanges of information rather than meaningful communication. When I expressed concern, Catherine accused me of trying to hold her back. "I just want a mother for our daughter," I would say. She would reply that she was building a legacy for Jessica. Tech Fusion went public in 1993, making Catherine an overnight millionaire. Our modest home was traded for a mansion. Private schools, luxury cars, designer clothes all followed. But as material wealth flowed in, emotional connection drained out. Jessica began to idolize her mother, seeing only the success and glamour, not understanding the cost. The final blow came when I discovered Catherine was having an affair with her chief financial officer. When confronted, she was neither apologetic nor surprised I had found out. She spoke about our marriage as if discussing a business deal gone stale. "It simply does not work anymore, Damon," she said. "We want different things. I want to build an empire. You want to play house." The divorce was brutal. Catherine hired the most aggressive attorney in Seattle. With her resources and connections, she easily won primary custody of Jessica. The judge, impressed by Catherine and her array of character witnesses, limited my visitation rights to every other weekend. She even secured a stipulation that Jessica could decline visits if she wished. Something in Catherine's eyes told me she would make sure Jessica often wished exactly that. I left our family home with only my clothes, my car, and a heart that felt like it had been put through a wood chipper. In an instant, I had lost my wife, my daughter, and the future I had spent 15 years building. I moved into a small apartment above my restaurant and tried to figure out how a 40-year-old man starts over when half his soul has been torn away. The restaurant became my refuge. I worked longer hours than ever, expanding the menu, renovating the space, anything to keep my mind occupied. At night, alone in my apartment, I would look at photos of Jessica and wonder if she missed me, if she asked about me, if she understood that I had never wanted to leave her. The silence of those nights nearly broke me. Catherine made sure the divorce settlement was publicized in local business circles. My reputation suffered by association. People whispered that I must have done something terrible for such a successful, respected woman to cut me out so completely. The rumors hurt, but not as much as the distance growing between me and my daughter. 30 years later, I can still recall the exact moment I knew my marriage was truly over. It was not the day the divorce was finalized or the day I moved out. It was 2 weeks after the separation, when I came to pick up Jessica for our first weekend together. Catherine had already told her I had abandoned them for another woman, a complete lie that a 9-year-old could not possibly question. The look in my daughter's eyes, cold and betrayed, made me realize that Catherine had not just divorced me, she had declared war, and Jessica was both the prize and a weapon. The systematic destruction of my relationship with Jessica was Catherine's masterpiece of cruelty. It began subtly. Jessica would be sick or have a school event whenever our scheduled weekends arrived. Eventually, Catherine stopped pretending. "Jessica does not want to see you," she would say through the intercom of the gated mansion they now called home. I would stand there, holding a gift or tickets to something Jessica had once expressed interest in, powerless against the poison Catherine was feeding our daughter. By the time Jessica turned 12, the damage was nearly complete. I kept trying, sending letters weekly. I wrote about ordinary things, my life at the restaurant, funny stories about customers, recipes I thought she might enjoy learning someday. I asked questions about her life, her interests, her dreams. For the first year, Catherine returned them unopened. After that, I started sending them to Jessica's school instead, but I never knew if she received them or read them. I remember one particular heartbreak when Jessica was 13. Her middle school was putting on a talent show. I learned about it through a mutual friend and showed up, sitting in the back row, heart pounding with anticipation. Jessica performed a beautiful piano piece, something complex and moving that showed how talented she had become. When she finished to thunderous applause, I stood with tears streaming down my face, so proud I could barely breathe. As the crowd dispersed, I worked up the courage to approach her. Her face, when she saw me, was like a shutter slamming closed. "Did Mom say you could come?" she asked. Before I could answer, Catherine materialized, putting a protective arm around Jessica as if I were a threat. "Time to go, sweetie," she said, glaring at me over our daughter's head. "You have homework." For her 16th birthday, I saved up and bought Jessica her first car, a modest but safe sedan. I had it delivered to their house with a card. 2 days later, it was returned to me with a note from Catherine's assistant stating that Jessica already had a vehicle and did not need anything from me. I later saw photos in a society page of Catherine gifting Jessica a brand new luxury convertible at her lavish Sweet 16 party, to which I had not been invited. The hardest period was when Jessica went to college. She chose Stanford, her mother's alma mater, to study business. I drove down to California for move-in day, hoping that away from Catherine's direct influence, Jessica might give me a chance. I waited outside her dormitory for hours, watching other families help their children settle in, fathers carrying boxes and mothers arranging bedding, everyone emotional about this milestone. When Jessica finally arrived with Catherine and a professional moving crew, I approached hesitantly. Jessica saw me first, her expression hardening. "Mom, he's here," she said loudly. Catherine turned, whispered something to Jessica, then marched toward me. "This is inappropriate, Damon," Catherine hissed. "She's starting a new chapter and does not need your drama. Jessica has made it clear she does not want a relationship with you. Respect her wishes for once instead of thinking about yourself." What Catherine never understood was that my presence was never about me or what I wanted. It was about being a father, showing up even when it hurt, even when I was not wanted. It was about Jessica, knowing that no matter what she had been told, there was someone who would always love her unconditionally, without expectations tied to performance or achievement. As Jessica grew into adulthood, following Catherine into the business world, she became her mother's mini-me. Photos in business magazines showed them together at galas and conferences, both impeccably dressed, wearing identical expressions of cool confidence. Jessica graduated with honors and immediately took a position at Tech Fusion, fast-tracked for executive leadership. From afar, I watched my daughter become a stranger, molded in Catherine's image, taught to value the same things: power, status, material success, and to dismiss the same things: emotional connection, compassion, the messiness of genuine relationships. On Jessica's 25th birthday, I made one last major attempt to reach out. I had tracked her career through news articles and knew she had just completed a successful acquisition for Tech Fusion, her first major deal. I sent a handwritten letter of congratulations along with a gold locket that had belonged to my mother. Inside, I placed a tiny photo of the three of us, Catherine, Jessica, and me, from a beach day when Jessica was 4. Everyone was smiling, genuinely happy. I included a note saying simply, "I am proud of all you have accomplished and the strong woman you have become." Some part of me still hoped that adult Jessica might be ready to question the narrative she had been given. A week later, the package was returned, unopened. Along with it came a cease and desist letter from Jessica's personal attorney, stating that any further contact attempts would be considered harassment. The message was clear. As far as my daughter was concerned, I did not exist. The pain of losing a child who is still alive is unlike any other. There's no closure, no chance to properly grieve. Instead, there's this constant, aching hope that someday things might change, balanced against the growing reality that they probably never will. Each birthday, each holiday, each milestone reported in the media was another small death, another moment I was robbed of experiencing as her father. What haunted me most was not knowing if Jessica truly hated me or if she was simply fulfilling what was expected of her. Had Catherine's lies taken such deep root that Jessica genuinely believed I had abandoned her? Or did some small part of her wonder about me question the one-sided story she had been told? I would never know, and that uncertainty was perhaps the cruelest cut of all. By the time Jessica turned 30, I had stopped active attempts to contact her. The rejection had become too painful, the hope too costly to maintain. Instead, I resigned myself to loving her from afar, keeping tabs on her life through news articles and occasional social media glimpses, proud of her accomplishments, even as I mourned all I had missed. The little girl who once sat on my shoulders giggling with delight was gone, replaced by a polished corporate executive who had her mother's sharp business acumen, and I feared her coldness as well. After the divorce, rebuilding my life felt like trying to construct a house using toothpicks and bubble gum. Every foundation I tried to establish seemed shaky, every moment of peace temporary. The restaurant became both my prison and my salvation. I threw myself into work, expanding from a small bistro to a popular local establishment. Within 5 years, Damon's place had become known for its home-style cooking and warm atmosphere, the very things my marriage had lacked toward the end. Customers became my surrogate family. I knew their orders, their stories, their children's names. Mrs. Abernathy came every Tuesday for pot roast and told me about her grandchildren. The Johnson family celebrated every anniversary at table 7 by the window. Professor Williams graded papers at the corner table 3 afternoons a week, drinking endless cups of coffee. These small, consistent human connections kept me tethered when grief threatened to send me drifting. Despite the success of the restaurant, I lived simply. My apartment above the establishment was small but comfortable. I drove the same car for 15 years. Money that might have gone to vacations or luxuries went into a separate account instead. My futile attempt at creating some kind of inheritance for Jessica should she ever decide to acknowledge me again. The most unexpected development in my post-divorce life came through Thomas Bennett, Catherine's personal attorney. Thomas had handled her business affairs for years, including our divorce, but something about him always seemed at odds with Catherine's cutthroat approach. He had kind eyes behind his expensive glasses, and once, during a particularly nasty negotiation session, he had slipped me a note suggesting I get better legal representation. I couldn't afford it then, but I appreciated the humanity of the gesture. 3 years after the divorce, Thomas appeared at my restaurant near closing time. I assumed he was bringing more bad news or legal threats, but instead, he ordered a whiskey and asked if I had time to talk. When the last customers left, we sat at a corner table, and Thomas revealed something that would become a lifeline for me in the years ahead. "I don't agree with how she's handling things with your daughter," he said quietly. "I have ethical obligations as Catherine's attorney, but I'm also a father. I thought you might want to know how Jessica is really doing, beyond what you see in those staged photos." That night began an unusual friendship and information pipeline that would continue for 27 years. Thomas never betrayed attorney-client privilege in any actionable way, but he provided context and occasional updates that allowed me to maintain some thin connection to Jessica's life. He would mention when Jessica was struggling with a class in college, suggesting that if someone sent anonymous tutoring resources, it might help. He let me know when Jessica went through a difficult breakup with her college boyfriend, prompting me to send flowers to her apartment with no card. She never knew they were from me, but Thomas assured me they had made her smile during a dark time. Through Thomas, I learned that Catherine's empire had continued to grow exponentially. Tech Fusion expanded internationally, acquiring smaller companies and diversifying into multiple tech sectors. By 2010, Catherine's net worth had reached $123 million, making her one of the wealthiest self-made women in the country. Jessica, following in her footsteps, became the company's chief strategy officer by age 32. Thomas also revealed more troubling aspects of their lives. Catherine had become increasingly isolated, surrounding herself with yes people and sycophants. Her personal life was a revolving door of short-term relationships with much younger men, none lasting more than a few months. Jessica, meanwhile, had adopted her mother's workaholic tendencies and materialistic values. She lived in a luxury penthouse, drove exotic cars, and spent vacations in exclusive locations, always photographed with the right people. But according to Thomas, she had few genuine friends and had never maintained a romantic relationship for more than a year. When I asked Thomas why he was telling me all this, his answer was simple. Someone should know the truth about them. Someone should care about them as people, not assets or achievements. While monitoring Jessica's life from afar, I gradually rebuilt my own. The restaurant expanded to a second location. I took up woodworking as a hobby, finding peace in creating something tangible with my hands. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious materialized. The truth was, the divorce had left me too wary of vulnerability, too doubtful of my judgment in relationships. Instead, I built a community. My restaurants became gathering places. I started a scholarship fund for local culinary students. I volunteered teaching cooking classes at the community center. These activities couldn't fill the Jessica-shaped hole in my heart, but they gave my life meaning and purpose. Social media became both a blessing and a curse. I could see snippets of Jessica's life through public posts, professional photos of her accepting awards, giving speeches, attending charity galas, always impeccably dressed, always wearing her mother's confident smile. I saved these images in a private folder, a digital scrapbook of the moments I should have witnessed in person. Years passed. Gray crept into my hair. Wrinkles settled around my eyes. The restaurants thrived, and I eventually sold them to a former employee who had become like a son to me. Though I continued to work there 4 days a week, I couldn't imagine complete retirement. The quiet would have been too loud. One fall evening in 2024, as I was checking inventory in the restaurant storeroom, my phone rang. It was Thomas, his voice uncharacteristically solemn. "Catherine has pancreatic cancer, stage 4. She has 3 months at most. She's only telling a small circle of people, but I thought you should know." My response surprised us both. After a moment of stunned silence, I asked, "What can I do? How can I help?" 30 years of anger and hurt seemed to evaporate in that moment, replaced by a simple human compassion for the mother of my child facing her mortality. Thomas sounded equally surprised by my reaction. "Just be prepared," he said. "Things may get complicated. The funeral will be in 3 months. And Damon, the will reading will be interesting. That's all I can say for now." I hung up with a strange sense of foreboding. Thomas had never been one for cryptic statements. Whatever was coming, it would disrupt the careful equilibrium I had established over 3 decades of separation from Catherine and Jessica. I just didn't know then how complete that disruption would be. Thomas called again exactly 12 weeks after his warning about Catherine's illness. Her voice was measured, professional, but I could hear the slight tremor beneath. "Catherine passed last night. Peacefully, at home. The funeral is Saturday at Arlington Memorial Gardens, 2 o'clock. I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, a strange numbness spreading through me. 30 years of complex emotions, resentment, longing, anger, occasional indifference, all collided into an incomprehensible jumble. Catherine, the woman who had once been the center of my universe, and then the architect of my greatest pain, was gone. What do you feel when your enemy dies? What do you feel when that enemy is also the mother of your child, your first love, the person with whom you once shared your deepest dreams? I wasn't sure. Grief seemed inappropriate after so many years of deliberate separation. Relief felt callous. In the end, what I felt most was concern for Jessica, who had lost the parent who had remained, however imperfectly, in her life. "Should I go?" I asked Thomas. "Would my presence cause more harm than good?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Catherine left specific instructions that you be allowed to attend if you wish. And Damon, I think Jessica might need more support than she realizes right now. Just prepare yourself for hostility." The next 3 days passed in a fog. I pulled my old suit from the back of the closet, had it dry cleaned. I found myself staring at old photographs, ones I normally kept locked away. Our wedding day. Catherine holding newborn Jessica. The 3 of us at the Space Needle, squinting in the sundae. We looked happy then. Were we really? Or was I remembering what I wanted to see? Saturday arrived cold and overcast, appropriate funeral weather. Arlington Memorial Gardens was the most exclusive cemetery in the city, reserved for the wealthy and influential. Catherine's funeral reflected her status. Black limousines lined the curved driveway. A sea of designer black clothing. Television cameras kept at a respectful distance, documenting the passing of a tech pioneer and business icon. I parked my modest sedan at the far end of the lot and walked slowly toward the gathered crowd. No one noticed me at first. Why would they? I was a ghost from another lifetime, unrecognizable to most of Catherine's circle. I took a seat in the last row, trying to make myself invisible. The service was, as I expected, more a celebration of Catherine's professional accomplishments than a reflection on her as a person. Business associates spoke of her vision, her drive, her financial acumen. No one mentioned her laugh, her love of raspberry ice cream, how she used to sing off-key in the shower, all the small human details that once made up the Catherine I knew. Jessica sat in the front row, ramrod straight, flanked by tech fusion executives. From behind, she looked so much like her mother that my breath caught. She wore her grief like armor, dignified and controlled. When she rose to speak, her voice was steady, her eulogy polished and appropriate. She spoke of her mother as a pioneer, a mentor, an inspiration. Not once did she use the word love. After the ceremony, people began to mingle, exchanging business cards along with condolences. I stood awkwardly on the periphery, debating whether to approach Jessica or simply leave. The decision was made for me when a young executive assistant approached. "Mr. Wilson, Jessica would like a word." I followed her to a small side garden where Jessica stood alone, staring at a marble angel statue. Up close, I could see the strain beneath her perfect composure, tiny fracture lines in the porcelain facade. "Why are you here?" she asked without turning. Her voice was cold, precisely like her mother's had been during the divorce proceedings. "She was your mother. You're my daughter. Where else would I be?" I kept my voice gentle, free of accusation or demand. Jessica turned then, fixing me with eyes so like my own it was disorienting. "Now she's dead. You suddenly care? How convenient. For 30 years, nothing. And now you show up looking for what? Sympathy? A relationship? A piece of the inheritance?" The unfairness of her accusation stung, but I swallowed my defense. This wasn't the time to correct decades of poisonous misinformation. I simply said, "I've always cared, Jessica. I always will. I'm sorry for your loss." She laughed, a brittle sound without humor. "Save it. Mother told me all about you, how you abandoned us when Tech Fusion started taking off, how you couldn't handle her success, how you chose your little restaurant over your family. I don't need your fake sympathy or your presence in my life now. The reading of the will is Wednesday at 2, at Thomas Bennett's office. Mother probably left you something insulting. Feel free to collect it and disappear again." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone among strangers who were already whispering, wondering who the plain older man might be and why he had upset the grieving daughter. As I drove home, I felt oddly calm despite Jessica's attack. There was nothing new in her accusations, nothing I hadn't heard or imagined her thinking for 3 decades. What struck me most was the emptiness behind her anger, as if she were reciting lines from a play she had rehearsed her entire life but never quite believed. Back at my apartment, I poured a glass of whiskey and toasted Catherine silently. "Goodbye, Kate," I thought, using the nickname she had always hated. "Whatever else you did, you gave me Jessica. I hope you found some peace in the end." The next few days passed slowly. I kept expecting Thomas to call with details about the will reading, but my phone remained silent. On Tuesday evening, I finally called him. "Is the will reading still happening tomorrow?" I asked when he answered. "Yes," Thomas said, sounding tired. 2 o'clock, my office. "Damon, I can't say much, but brace yourself. Catherine's final wishes are going to cause quite a stir." "What does that mean?" I pressed, suddenly uneasy. "Just be there," he said, "and maybe bring a good book. It might be a long afternoon." I hung up more confused than before. What possible role could I play in Catherine's will that would require a long afternoon? I expected to receive some token bequest, possibly with strings attached or a final insult embedded within. $5 seemed about right for Catherine's sense of humor. What I couldn't imagine was that her final act would completely upend the careful detente I had maintained with my past for 30 long years. Thomas Bennett's law office occupied the entire 47th floor of Seattle's most prestigious downtown tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, the harbor, and on clear days like this one, the distant mountains. The reception area featured original artwork, leather furnishings, and an atmosphere of quiet, expensive competence. I felt wildly out of place in my department store suit and scuffed shoes, a relic from another era invading a temple of modern wealth. The receptionist eyed me with barely concealed skepticism when I gave my name, but directed me to a large conference room at the end of a long hallway. I paused outside the heavy wooden door, gathering courage before entering what felt like enemy territory. Inside, about 15 people were already seated around an enormous oval table. I recognized most of Tech Fusion's executive team from news photographs. Several people I assumed were Catherine's friends or more distant relatives clustered at one end, speaking in hushed tones. Jessica sat at the head of the table next to an empty chair presumably reserved for Thomas. She was deep in conversation with a sharp-featured man I recognized as Tech Fusion's current CEO. When I entered, conversations stuttered to silence. Jessica looked up, her expression shifting from professional grief to irritation. She gestured impatiently to an empty chair near the door, as far from her as possible. "Mr. Wilson, so glad you could make it. Please, take a seat so we can proceed once Thomas arrives." Her tone made it clear that my presence was barely tolerated, a minor inconvenience to be endured. I nodded politely and took the offered seat, feeling the curious stares of the others. I heard someone whisper, "That's the ex-husband?" followed by a muffled response. I couldn't quite catch, but that provoked several subtle smirks. Thomas entered precisely at 2 o'clock, accompanied by 2 junior attorneys carrying stacks of documents. He greeted everyone with professional courtesy, giving me a nearly imperceptible nod of encouragement before taking his seat. "Thank you all for coming today," he began. "As you know, we are here for the reading of Catherine Morgan's last will and testament. Before we begin, I want to note that Catherine revised her will approximately 4 months ago, shortly after her diagnosis. This version supersedes all previous wills and has been properly witnessed and notarized." A murmur ran through the room. Jessica frowned slightly, drumming manicured fingernails on the polished table. "A last minute will change?" she asked. "You never mentioned that." Thomas adjusted his glasses. "It was your mother's wish that the contents remain private until today's reading." The one person who had gone completely silent was the CEO, and something in his stillness caught my attention. He didn't look surprised, just resigned. Thomas began reading the formal opening of the will, legal language establishing Catherine's sound mind and clear intentions. Then came the specific bequests. "To my assistant, Marilyn Jenkins, for 20 years of loyal service, I leave the sum of $100,000 and my collection of vintage scarves." Marilyn, a thin woman in her 60s, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "To the Seattle Children's Hospital, I leave $5 million for the establishment of a pediatric technology research center bearing my name." The list continued. Monetary gifts to various employees and friends. Charitable donations to organizations Catherine had supported publicly. Specific personal items distributed among her inner circle. With each bequest, Jessica's expression grew more confident, more satisfied. Each item that went to someone else meant more remaining in the presumed bulk of the estate that would surely come to her. When Thomas paused to take a sip of water, Jessica sat forward slightly, clearly anticipating her name to be called next. Instead, Thomas cleared his throat and continued, "To my former husband, Damon Wilson." The room went completely still. Jessica's smile froze on her face. "I leave the sum of $5. Jessica's frozen smile thawed into a smirk. She turned to me, eyes glittering with malicious triumph. "You get $5, Dad," she said, voice dripping with satisfaction. I nodded, accepting this final slight with more grace than I felt. It was exactly what I had expected from Catherine, a final symbolic dismissal. What I hadn't expected was Thomas's expression. Instead of moving on to the next bequest, he was watching Jessica with what looked almost like pity. Thomas turned the page with deliberate slowness. "Additionally," he continued, "to Damon Wilson, I leave controlling interest in Tech Fusion Incorporated, all subsidiary companies, my personal investments portfolio, real estate holdings, and all remaining assets not specifically bequeathed elsewhere in this document." The room erupted. Jessica shot to her feet, face drained of color. "What? That's impossible. There must be a mistake." Thomas continued reading, his voice rising above the chaos. "This decision comes after much reflection on the true values that should guide a legacy. While my professional achievements brought financial success, I recognize now what was sacrificed in their pursuit. Damon Wilson demonstrated through his life choices a understanding of what truly matters, consistent integrity, human connection, and quiet generosity. I entrust to him the stewardship of what I have built, confident he will guide it with wisdom I came to lack." Jessica snatched the document from Thomas's hands, scanning it frantically. "This can't be legal," she shouted. "She wasn't in her right mind when she wrote this." The will has been thoroughly validated, Thomas said calmly. Multiple physicians certified her mental competence. The document is legally binding and unambiguous. And what about me? Jessica demanded, voice cracking. What did she leave for her only daughter? Thomas reclaimed the document from Jessica's trembling hands. To my daughter, Jessica Morgan, I leave the sum of $5 and the sincere hope that she will learn what took me a lifetime to understand, that wealth without purpose or connection is the poorest existence of all. Jessica's face contorted with rage and disbelief. Her mouth opened and closed, no words emerging. The CEO reached for her arm, but she jerked away violently, knocking over her water glass. The crash of breaking glass punctuated the stunned silence. I sat perfectly still, as shocked as everyone else in the room. This made no sense. Catherine, who had systematically excluded me from my daughter's life, who had built an empire on ruthless business tactics and unapologetic ambition, had just handed me control of everything she valued. It had to be some kind of elaborate joke or final revenge strategy I couldn't yet understand. Through the buzzing in my ears, I heard Thomas continuing, explaining technical details about the transfer of assets, tax implications, transition procedures. Jessica was now shouting about contesting the will, demanding second opinions on Catherine's mental state, threatening lawsuits against both Thomas and me. And still I sat, watching this drama unfold, as if from a great distance, wondering what game Catherine had been playing, and why, after 30 years of absence, she had cast me as the surprise victor in her final act. The aftermath of Thomas's announcement was pure chaos. Jessica stormed out, nearly knocking over a junior associate who didn't move out of her way quickly enough. Half the executives followed her, while others lingered, suddenly eyeing me with calculated interest, mentally recalibrating their positions in this unexpected new reality. The CEO, a man named Paul Richardson, approached me with a business card and a too-firm handshake. "We should talk soon, Mr. Wilson. I can help you understand the company's current position and strategic direction. Perhaps dinner next week?" The speed with which allegiances shifted was both fascinating and disturbing. Before the will reading, I had been invisible. Now I was worth cultivating. I pocketed his card with a non-committal nod and made my way to where Thomas stood gathering papers. "What just happened?" I asked quietly. Thomas glanced around at the remaining people, still whispering among themselves and casting curious glances our way. "Not here," he murmured. "My private office. 10 minutes." I found the men's room and splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The same aging face looked back at me, lined with decades of work and weathered by loss. Now, supposedly, the controller of a fortune I had never sought and didn't want. What had Catherine been thinking? Thomas's private office was a stark contrast to the opulent conference room, smaller and more personal, with family photos on the desk and well-worn leather chairs. He closed the door behind me and sank heavily into his seat, suddenly looking every one of his 60-plus years. "I expected questions," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "You must have dozens." "Only one that matters," I replied. "Why?" Thomas opened a drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Catherine left this for you. I think it might answer that better than I can." The envelope was heavy, expensive stationery, with my name written in Catherine's distinctive handwriting. I broke the seal with unsteady fingers and unfolded several pages of handwritten text. Catherine's penmanship, once so familiar to me, now seemed like a message from a ghost. "Damon," the letter began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've just received the surprise of your life. You're wondering if this is some elaborate posthumous revenge. It isn't. It's the closest thing to amends I know how to make." I stared at Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. I continued reading silently. "What you don't know is that I've been watching you for years. Not in a creepy stalker way, but keeping tabs through mutual acquaintances, community news, even dining at your restaurant occasionally in disguise. I've seen how you built a life of meaning after I destroyed our family. I've seen your kindness to employees, your mentorship of young people, your quiet contributions to causes you believe in. You created connection, while I created wealth. You chose humanity, while I chose empire. It took terminal cancer for me to recognize which of us made the better choice. My vision blurred with unexpected tears. I paused, collecting myself before continuing. The truth that's hardest to admit is what I did to Jessica. I used her as a weapon against you, poisoned her mind with lies, and raised her to value all the wrong things. I thought I was preparing her to be strong in a harsh world, but instead I taught her to be harsh in a world that needs more strength of character, not more cutthroat ambition. Watching her become a reflection of my worst qualities has been my greatest regret. I know this inheritance will shock and anger her. I know it seems cruel, but Jessica has been surrounded by yes people her entire life. She's never faced real adversity or had to question her assumptions. She needs this wake-up call, harsh as it is. And you, despite everything I put you through, are the only person I trust to handle this situation with the compassion and wisdom it requires. The letter continued for another page, detailing Catherine's decline, her reflections on life's true values, her hopes that somehow her final act might begin to repair what she had broken. The last paragraph struck me hardest. I don't expect your forgiveness, Damon. What I did was unforgivable, but I am asking for your help. Help our daughter find what I lost and you managed to keep, a heart that recognizes what truly matters. You have every right to walk away from this mess I've created. No one would blame you, but I'm betting on the man I once loved, who I know is still in there despite everything I did to hurt him. I'm betting on your capacity for love to be stronger than my capacity for destruction. Please prove me right, for Jessica's sake if not for mine. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope, mind reeling. Thomas watched me silently, giving me space to process. She was dying when she wrote this? I finally asked. Thomas nodded. The doctors had just told her she had 6 months at most. I think facing her mortality forced her to reevaluate everything. Did Jessica know her mother was watching me all these years? No, Thomas said. Catherine was very discreet about it. She would use disguises, different names. I think part of her was ashamed of her interest in your life, like it contradicted the narrative she had created about your divorce. I stood and paced the small office, trying to make sense of this revelation. In all my imaginings about Catherine over the years, genuine remorse had never featured, yet the letter in my hand suggested a level of self-awareness and regret I wouldn't have thought possible from the woman who had so methodically excised me from my daughter's life. Jessica's going to contest the will, I said. She'll claim Catherine wasn't in her right mind. She'll try, Thomas agreed. But Catherine anticipated that. She had 3 separate psychiatric evaluations done before signing the will. She recorded video testimony, explaining her decisions. She documented everything meticulously, the way she always did in business. The will is ironclad. Outside Thomas's office window, the afternoon sun illuminated the Seattle skyline. Somewhere out there, Jessica was likely already assembling a team of attorneys, preparing for battle. My daughter, who had spent 30 years being taught to hate me, now had a new reason to see me as the enemy, the man who had stolen her birthright. What would you do? I asked Thomas. If you were in my position, Thomas considered for a moment. I'd remember that Catherine's last wish wasn't about the money or the company. It was about Jessica. Whatever you decide about the inheritance, that's the part that matters most. I nodded, Catherine's words echoing in my mind. I'm betting on your capacity for love to be stronger than my capacity for destruction. As I left the law office, my phone was already buzzing with messages from people who had somehow heard the news, distant acquaintances suddenly interested in reconnecting, financial advisors offering services, even a few journalists seeking comments. The world had shifted beneath my feet in the space of an afternoon, transforming me from an aging restaurant owner to the controller of a business empire. But walking to my car in the fading afternoon light, I wasn't thinking about stock options or corporate governance or sudden wealth. I was thinking about a little girl with pigtails and skinned knees who used to ride on my shoulders, squealing with delight. I was thinking about an angry young woman whose face had gone pale with shock and betrayal as her mother's will was read. I was thinking about 30 years of absence and hurt, and wondering if there was any path forward that could possibly lead to healing. 2 weeks after the will reading, I sat in my modest kitchen drinking coffee, surrounded by stacks of legal documents, financial statements, and corporate records. Learning the intricacies of Catherine's business empire was like trying to learn a foreign language in days. Tech Fusion had grown into a sprawling multinational with 17,000 employees across 4 continents. The corporate structure was dizzyingly complex, and the numbers involved made my restaurant's annual revenue look like pocket change. Thomas had assigned his best associates to help me understand what I now controlled, but the reality remained overwhelming. Meanwhile, as predicted, Jessica had filed legal challenges to the will, hiring a team of high-powered attorneys to argue that Catherine had been mentally incompetent when making her final decisions. The business press was having a field day with the story, speculating about my intentions, my qualifications, and the future of one of the tech industry's most influential companies. Through it all, I kept coming back to Catherine's letter, reading it nightly, trying to understand what she had really wanted. Not just for the company, but for Jessica and for me. I'm betting on your capacity for love to be stronger than my capacity for destruction. Those words haunted me. On a rainy Tuesday morning, I made a decision. I called Thomas and asked him to arrange 2 meetings, the first with Jessica alone, the second with the Tech Fusion Board of Directors. Both would be difficult in different ways, but necessary. Jessica agreed to meet only with her attorneys present, at Thomas's office on neutral ground. When I arrived, she sat rigidly in the same conference room where the will had been read, flanked by 3 serious-looking lawyers. Her face was a mask of controlled hostility. "Thank you for coming," I began. "Let's skip the pleasantries," she cut in. "My attorneys tell me you wanted this meeting. What's your proposal?" I looked at the strangers in expensive suits sitting beside my daughter, then back at her. "I'd like to speak with you alone first, Jessica. Just 10 minutes. Anything you have to say can be said in front of my legal team," she replied coldly. I considered pushing the point, then decided against it. "This is about your mother, not about the money. I recently learned some truths that you deserve to know, regardless of what happens with the inheritance." For the next 15 minutes, I spoke directly to Jessica, ignoring her attorneys. I told her about Catherine's secret surveillance of my life, about the letter, about Catherine's regrets. I explained that, contrary to what she had been told her entire life, I had never abandoned them, never stopped trying to be part of her life, never remarried or started a new family. I spoke of the letters returned unopened, the visits rejected, the gifts declined. Jessica's expression remained skeptical, but I saw tiny fractures in her composure, moments of doubt flashing across her face. "That's a convenient story," she finally said. "But you're the only one telling it now that Mother is gone. I'm supposed to just believe you?" I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a folder. "Here are copies of every letter I wrote to you that was returned unopened. Over 300 of them, spanning 20 years. I've kept them all. Here are receipts for gifts sent back, school programs from events I attended but wasn't allowed to approach you at. And here," I handed her Catherine's letter, "is your mother's own confession of what she did." One of the attorneys reached for the letter, but Jessica waved him off, taking it herself. She read silently, color draining from her face. When she finished, she looked up at me, truly seeing me perhaps for the first time in decades. "This doesn't change anything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It changes everything," I replied gently. "Not the legal situation, perhaps, but the truth of our past. I never stopped loving you, Jessica, not for one day. Your mother knew that, in the end." Jessica stood abruptly. "I need time to process this." Her attorneys exchanged glances, clearly unhappy with this unscripted response. "We'll continue this discussion at a later date." After she left, I met with the Tech Fusion Board, laying out the plan I had been formulating. My proposal was unexpected but rooted in what I believed Catherine truly wanted as her legacy. 2 days later, I called a press conference. Reporters filled the Tech Fusion headquarters auditorium, cameras rolling as I approached the podium. Jessica sat in the front row, face unreadable. We had spoken briefly that morning. A stilted but civil conversation that felt like the first fragile step on a very long road. "Good morning," I began. "My name is Damon Wilson. Many of you have been speculating about who I am and what my plans are for Tech Fusion, following Catherine Morgan's unexpected bequest. Today I want to provide some clarity." I paused, looking out at the sea of curious faces. I am not a tech mogul. I'm a restaurant owner who believes in feeding people good food and creating spaces where community can thrive. I have no qualifications to run a global technology company, nor do I have any desire to do so. But Catherine Morgan, in her final act, entrusted me with something precious, not just a business empire, but a chance to heal what was broken in our family. After careful consideration and consultation with the Tech Fusion Board, I am announcing today the establishment of the Morgan Wilson Foundation. 70% of Tech Fusion shares will be transferred to this foundation, which will have 3 primary missions. First, to fund technology education for underprivileged youth. Second, to support innovation addressing critical social and environmental challenges. And third, to promote corporate cultures that value human connection alongside productivity and profit. The remaining 30% of shares will remain within the current corporate structure, ensuring stability and continuity for employees and shareholders. Day to day, operations will continue under the current management team, with board oversight from the foundation. I glanced at Jessica, whose expression had shifted from guarded to confused. The Morgan Wilson Foundation will need strong leadership from someone who understands both the technology sector and Catherine Morgan's legacy. That's why I'm appointing Jessica Morgan as the Foundation's first executive director, should she choose to accept the position. A murmur ran through the crowd. Jessica's eyes widened in surprise. This arrangement honors what I believe was Catherine Morgan's true final wish, not to punish her daughter or reward her ex-husband, but to create a bridge between 2 people who lost 30 years they can never get back. It ensures Tech Fusion's continued success while redirecting a significant portion of its profits toward meaningful social impact. And most importantly, it offers Jessica and me a chance to work together, to get to know each other, and perhaps to find some healing along the way. The press conference erupted with questions, but I was watching only Jessica. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and for the first time in 3 decades, I saw something other than hostility in my daughter's gaze. Uncertainty, yes. Wariness, certainly. But also a flicker of curiosity and perhaps the faintest hint of hope. The weeks and months that followed were challenging. Jessica initially approached the foundation work with skepticism, attending meetings with arms crossed and contributions minimal. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Working together on foundation initiatives gave us neutral ground, a shared purpose that allowed conversation without immediately triggering old wounds. Our first breakthrough came 6 months after Catherine's death. The foundation was reviewing applications for its inaugural education grants, and Jessica and I were discussing a particularly compelling proposal from an inner-city school. At one point, she mentioned offhandedly that she had always loved science as a child, but had pursued business because that's what her mother valued. "You built a volcano for your 4th-grade science fair," I said without thinking. It erupted all over the dining room table. "Your mother was furious about the carpet, but you were so proud." Jessica looked at me, startled. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," I said simply. That night, for the first time, Jessica agreed to have dinner with me outside of foundation business. We went to my old restaurant, now run by my former protege but still serving my recipes. Over pasta and wine, Jessica cautiously asked about her childhood, things she either didn't remember or had been told different versions of. I answered truthfully but without bitterness, sharing small, precious memories of her early years. By dessert, she was showing me pictures on her phone of her life now, her apartment, her dog, places she had traveled. It wasn't forgiveness yet, or even trust, but it was a beginning. 1 year after Catherine's death, Jessica and I stood together at her grave, placing flowers in quiet remembrance. The silence between us was no longer hostile, just reflective. "Do you think she knew this would happen?" Jessica asked suddenly. "That the foundation would bring us together?" "I think she hoped," I replied. "Your mother was always a master strategist." Jessica nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "That she was." As we walked back to our cars, Jessica said something that stopped me in my tracks. "I've been reading your letters, the ones you wrote all those years. I found them in Mother's storage unit. She kept them all, even though she told me she sent them back." My heart constricted at this revelation, another layer of Catherine's complex final confession. She had kept the physical evidence of my attempts to reach our daughter, perhaps as insurance against her own conscience. "They're beautiful letters," Jessica continued. "I wish I'd read them then." "I wish that too," I said, throat tight with emotion. "But we can't get those years back. We can only decide what to do with the time we have now." Jessica nodded, then surprised me by reaching out to briefly squeeze my hand. "See you on Thursday for the board meeting?" "I will be there," I promised. 2 years have now passed since that shocking day in Thomas Bennett's office when Catherine's will turned both our lives upside down. Jessica and I aren't perfectly reconciled. There are still tender spots, still moments of distance. 3 decades of separation can't be erased in 2 years. But we have dinner together most Sunday evenings. She calls me when she has news to share. Last month, she invited me to her 40th birthday celebration, introducing me to her friends as her dad, a simple word that felt like the most valuable inheritance anyone could receive. The Morgan Wilson Foundation has become a significant force for good, funding educational initiatives and technology innovations that are changing lives. Jessica has thrown herself into the work with unexpected passion, discovering that purpose beyond profit brings a satisfaction she never found in corporate success alone. And I've found unexpected joy in getting to know my adult daughter, in discovering the woman she's become, and glimpsing occasionally the child I once knew. Catherine's final lesson to us both was that true wealth has nothing to do with money. The richest people aren't those who accumulate the most, but those who understand what is truly valuable: human connection, compassion, purpose beyond self. It took her a lifetime and a terminal diagnosis to learn that lesson. In her final act of both atonement and love, she ensured that Jessica and I had the chance to learn it together. So if you are watching this and struggling with family estrangement, with relationships that seem beyond repair, or with values that have led you down a path that feels increasingly empty, remember that it's never too late to change direction. The true measure of wealth is not what you have, but what you give. Not what you achieve, but who you become along the way. And sometimes, the most valuable inheritance isn't something you can count in dollars. What about you? Has a family estrangement affected your life? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of healing and redemption. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, it's never too late for a new beginning, no matter how impossible it might seem.